All right. Super excited today to be here. Awesome panel lined up with some brilliant minds. Why don't we start? I'm Benton with Cointelegraph, as we introduced. Why don't we go around real quick? Tell us a little bit about what you do and what you are most excited about inside the investing space. We'll start over here with Lydia.
Hey guys, good to see everybody here. I am Vice President of Business Development at Alva Labs and also co-manage the Blizzard Ecosystem Fund. So day to day, managing the BD strategy and finding great projects to invest in. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing lately is this influx and growth of the gaming landscape. I think there'll probably be a huge topic we talk about today, but the games are maturing in their design and their tokenomics, so that's been super exciting to see how that all shakes out.
We'll pass it right over here.
Hey everyone, Austin Barak. I'm a partner at Coin Fund. We're one of the first funds investing exclusively in crypto all the way back since 2015. Multi-strategy firm investing across liquid and private tokens. Focused primarily on the early stage, but looking at deals all the way from pre-seed, seed through kind of A and beyond. But yeah, glad to be speaking with you all today.
Hey everyone, my name is Wangarian. I was previously a principal at Defiance Capital. I'm currently a sole angel investor. Things I really like at the moment, currently gaming subnets on Avalanche. No surprise there. Yeah, no, I'll leave it to Bryan.
Thank you. My name is Bryan. I'm the co-founder of Republic Crypto, and I also head our advisory team. We basically work with projects all around the blockchain industry. Things that I'm pretty excited about these days is obviously stuff being built on Avalanche. We're very excited for the future of subnets. We're also excited about all things kind of infrastructure and interoperability related. So yeah, let's do this.
Right on. Super excited to dive into some of this stuff, but I want to kind of better understand the landscape of where we're looking at right now inside of crypto. There's so many evolutions happening with metaverse, with DeFi, gaming, as we just saw. What areas are we looking at for potential investments, and where do we feel that hyper growth is going to come from? Lydia, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so within Blizzard, I think as an ecosystem fund, there's a really interesting dynamic here where our focus is on projects building on Avalanche. And that includes stuff that is kind of that has a cross-chain nature as well as exclusively on Avalanche. So what we're looking at is finding the missing primitives and the missing pieces in the ecosystem to really drive continued growth. And that can be in the form of TVL, or that can be subnets, transactions, users, kind of anything that we see will help Avalanche grow. So with that said, one of the things that we're super excited about is kind of use cases for subnets. We're really excited to see adoption of subnets grow. And right now that has been gaming initially. I think that's a very obvious use case that everyone has seen. But you know, we're also going to see institutional DeFi on subnets, and there's more to come with that. So just generally, anything that can take a subnet and really show that this is really something to be taken advantage of and really helps the ecosystem grow.
I have a question for Lydia real quick, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So for the subnets, and you're excited about how more people can use subnets, but as an investor or a potential investor, how can one participate in the upside of subnets?
So there are a couple of different ways, and I think we'll see more as it evolves, right? So I think people have coined the term initial subnet offerings, but we haven't seen that just yet. I wonder how that'll look. I think we can all take our guess at what that probably will be in its simplest thing. You know, a project that builds its own subnet, issues its own token that powers the subnet, be used as the gas token and kind of be the unit of accounting for that subnet. So that's kind of one way that I think it'll happen initially.
Do you all want to chime in here?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that I'm really excited about in Avalanche. Subnets obviously being one. One of the really interesting things that I think the way Avalanche went to market that's different than some other ecosystems is other chains that are built as networks for application-specific chains, like a subnet, don't have a base layer themselves that they can bootstrap early adoption, and you need to have that subnet or kind of that application specific chain as a surface area for contracts to deploy. But Avalanche, having a C chain and having kind of a base layer as a surface area for applications to deploy, and then deploying subnets later, was a really interesting go-to-market. But beyond that, I think the finality aspect of Avalanche's consensus mechanism is something that really differentiates it and will be more and more important as we see kind of broader adoption, where you have, instead of Nakamoto consensus where it's probabilistic over a certain number of confirmations, having a transaction be final and irreversible within less than a second will enable a lot more use cases, and I think that's something that will become increasingly important.
Yeah, just to take a step back and look at different verticals that I'm optimistic on. I think in general, productive NFT assets are something that we're only just beginning to scratch the surface on, and DeFi as it is has been, to be honest, pretty stale over the past 3 to 6 months. We haven't really seen a lot of very new innovation at least recently, and I think DeFi utility within the NFT space is something that is extremely underpenetrated, and I'm seeing early stage projects trying to tap the surface of that. I think that's very interesting.
Actually, that's a really interesting point, right? Like, I think that NFTs have been such a unstoppable force in crypto these days that there's so much value generated there, but the power of DeFi has not fully been connected to that. So think of like collateralized lending that's backed by the value of NFTs, or just being able to like have more liquidity across NFT projects. So I think that's super fascinating. And I also think the infrastructure that's set up cross-chain to facilitate all of that hasn't existed yet. So back to my earlier point, I'm really still focused on interoperability and infrastructure. I think Avalanche is really interesting, is really well placed because that's just part of their architecture. So if you're in the Avalanche ecosystem, you're kind of already set. But it's also, as an investor, it's hard to ignore the presence of, Polkadot, Ethereum, Binance, Solana, and how all those chains will also communicate across each other.
I want to touch on a point that you brought up about the interoperability and kind of the future of L1s. We've seen this Cambrian explosion of L1s across the entire space, but what does this next evolution look like in terms of the L1s? I think we're all bullish on Avalanche here, but I want to kind of better understand each one of your takes on what that evolution looks like in getting to that interoperability future, because I do think that plays into how folks want to invest and where to invest. Lydia, if you want to kick us off.
Well, it's hard to say from where I'm sitting, right? We do believe it's going to be a multi-chain world, and every L1, the ones who really find their product market fit will be around. And the interoperability, I think you've already seen different types of bridges get deployed. I mean, we've kind of seen problems with them as well. But as the technology matures, they'll become more secure. But I think there's going to be a space for everybody, and everyone's going to have their own purpose and have their own specialization. So what that interoperability piece looks like, though, like we need to definitely bridge NFTs cross-chain. There's a lot of applications that we just haven't seen take place yet. I think the most basic thing is the rental of NFTs so far, and that only really happens in gaming. If we could unlock the value of these things across multiple chains, to Bryan's point, like in DeFi, that would be huge, and then you definitely have that liquidity traveling across chains, and hopefully more to Avalanche.
Great points.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about interoperability, and I think we've seen DeFi 1.0 come out during DeFi Summer in 2020, and a lot of the core primitives around decentralized exchange, borrow, lend, gain a lot of adoption, and then the DeFi 2.0 and some of the iterations on top of that. But we haven't really seen significant amount of innovation in the last 6 to 9 months as far as new primitives, and I think interoperability is what really unlocks that, when you can bridge together different ecosystems but make complex transactions much more simple. So It's not a matter of bridging funds from Terra to Avalanche to trade into one token to then deposit on a borrow lend and, you know, get USDC and then buy some like Trader Joe token. If you could do all of that, the bridging, the swaps, all of that in one transaction and pay gas just on one side, that's where it becomes really interesting. Or, for example, you have an NFT on Avalanche, but with where instead of needing to actually bridge the NFT to Ethereum to get certain access or certain kind of credibility or recognition for the work that you've done on Avalanche, instead of having to actually bridge that NFT over, just bridge over the data that you own that NFT on Avalanche and have that be enough. So I think interoperability, but taking that next step beyond just value transfer, but taking really complex transactions and making them more simple is what's going to really catalyze this next wave of innovation on DeFi and NFTs. So really excited to see that happen.
Yeah, I think in general the market structure for L1s, if you think about it, I don't think you're going to have, call it 10 to 20 different L1s competing for dominant market share. I think once it matures, you're probably going to get a sort of an oligopolistic market structure where you have 3 to 4 dominant L1s and maybe they take up, let's say, 80% of market share, and probably call it 5 to 6 other L1s trying to fight for that other 20%. But I think if you take a step back and you look at interoperability, ideally, if we were supposed to onboard billions of people onto Web3, you're going to need interoperability at a level where the end user doesn't really know or doesn't need to know or doesn't need to care about which blockchain they're on. I think until we reach that point, we're really not going to see true worldwide adoption yet. We're pretty far from that, but there are certain solutions out there at the moment that are making good strides in getting there.
I think, Austin, to your point about bridging not just the asset itself, but the value, like that's where I kind of see where interoperability is going as well. We don't have to actually be bridging the actual assets across, but one thing that I've been seeing is maybe like a layer of data aggregation or oracles where the oracle itself will just query cross-chain and be able to serve as a decentralized repository of data that all the different chains can plug into to get what they need. That's a very interesting thought to think about. I also think cross-chain data storage. So think of something like a Filecoin where you're decentralizing this for the file storage, but not just on Ethereum, but it's across all the chains. So you'll have both data and, you'll have data and also like file data stored in kind of like almost a layer 0 type of situation that multiple chains can connect to. Not to be confused with layer 0 of the project, but they're also addressing that. So, that kind of level of interoperability, I think, is where I see the future going. And at the end of the day, the whole point is that for the end user to not know what blockchain they're using and just have a fully fluid experience, but the blockchains themselves will still derive value and create value just by being utilized. But it's just the user experience is now abstracted in a way that the end user, which is like our friends, right? We all can like probably end up working directly on a blockchain, but we're talking about like our parents or our friends that aren't familiar with crypto. We want them to be able to use these chains as well, but in a way that they don't have to be technical about it. And by doing that, it'll still accrue value to AVAX. It'll still accrue value to ETH. And arguably, it'll probably accrue more value than it is today. So having a strong infrastructure and interoperability play combined with a really great user experience is, to me, where I see the future going for that.
But a question about like the interoperability, sometimes I think it feels like it could be a moving target when we're kind of looking at it from an investment standpoint. When you're looking at interoperability, are you saying that infrastructure is where everything is going to kind of start and build from, and so that's from an investment perspective, that's what you're looking at? Yeah,
so I think infrastructure has to be the primary focus, because without a strong infrastructure, you wouldn't be able to scale. So I think each chain itself can focus on infrastructure that'll work for it. And then once that infrastructure has been built, then you can have like cross-chain communication or a layer 0 level of communication. And those are two separate verticals, and they can, I would invest in infrastructure first and then interoperability second, but I think today we're kind of at a point where both are being built in parallel.
Definitely. Now I kind of want to pivot things into a little bit more broader, like markets, to better understand what each of your takes are for where we're at, and what would it take for the next kind of bull run. Is it big institutions? Is it nation states? What is going to have to happen? What's that catalyst that's going to kind of push the market over the top? What does that look like from your perspective?
That's a tough one. So, kind of macro events aside, because that's kind of the overruling narrative, usually risk appetite and kind of all that stuff. But I think we need to see innovative projects that kind of, to everyone's point, we haven't really seen new DeFi innovation in the last 6 to 9 months. So what does that look like, and which vertical is that next place? And we're going to keep coming back to this, but we're seeing a lot of stuff happen in gaming, and we're seeing a lot of different designs as well. And I think at the end of the day, what happens within gaming is it gives NFTs also a new place and a new utility. So you can use the NFTs within a game, find ways to also unlock the value of those NFTs outside of the game potentially. And then once you unlock that value, you can also translate that back into DeFi or kind of bridge it across to another chain. I'm not going to say another game, because that's just generally not how games are built, and it's not really feasible. But to that point, there's giving new utility and new value to accrue to things that already exist.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because right now crypto has almost this ceiling on it because of the macroeconomic environment, where as a risk asset along the furthest spectrum of risk assets, it's generally traded as a proxy for other markets, especially when they're closed on nights and weekends. So if anything is happening in the global economy, that gets reflected in Bitcoin before anything else. But what we're seeing now over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and we saw this in 2020 as well, right after COVID began, is crypto is starting to decorrelate from other major asset classes and starting to kind of behave according to its own rhythm again. So I think one, decorrelation from just broader macro that's putting a cap on things. And then I think the merge is going to be a really, really huge driver of excitement and enthusiasm, capital flowing into crypto. It's an amazing narrative for broader asset allocators to be able to invest in an asset like Ethereum that has a 15% yield and call it like an internet bond, transition from an ESG perspective, from proof of work to proof of stake, and then be much more scalable with L2s coming than it is right now. But I think what that does is it brings that attention into Ethereum and then quickly moves to other ecosystems. And the ecosystem that I think will benefit the most from that is Avalanche. One, because of EVM compatibility on the C chain, but two, more and more people are going to be thinking about resource contention of applications and how do you build on just one generalized smart contracting layer if, like there's an NFT mint and now gas is spiking. So I think the really ease of deploying on subnets is going to attract a lot of attention. So for me, I would say the catalysts are decorrelate from existing kind of macro factors, and then the merge. If markets aren't doing well by then, I think the merge will drive a really nice run.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm really just doubling down on gaming as sort of that next, if I were to ask myself what it needs to happen in order to see a bull run similar to what happened at DeFi Summer. And I think GameFi is really the only thing that can drive that kind of that kind of creativity and innovation and excitement within the space. If you look at how Axie took off in 2021, I think Axie's gaming model, if you look at it, it's not that fun to play. But it introduced play to earn, which is a very novel and very, it's a mechanism that I think really hasn't been scratched significantly. So in the future, I do expect, and if you're seeing through some of the presentations here today, Ascendus and Shrapnel, you have best gaming development teams in the world looking to build these mega AAA rated open world games. Wow. And yeah, I think the comparable for these open world games, the ones that really truly succeed, they will. I think a right comparable would be, you know, let's call it a country's GDP, because these are virtual economies that you're building, and you know, given that kind of scale and that kind of TAM, that's where you're going to get your next sort of 50, 100x in sort of the next 3 years.
But when it comes to like gaming, it seems like the metaverse gaming space is relatively new. Like, how are you assessing some of these projects and saying, hey, I believe in this and these are the reasons? What are some of the metrics behind that? What are stuff that you look at in particular when it comes to those projects?
Right. I mean, I think fundamentally you have to look at a game that you think, hey, shit, this is fun. I want to play this, right? And right now, if you look at Web3 games, you know, yeah, there kind of some nice graphics here and there. You click here and there a bit, but, you know, we haven't really scratched the surface as to what, you know, if you combine proper AAA rated, you know, Web 2 games and you introduce the play to earn mechanics in a sustainable and novel way, I think we haven't really got there yet.
So what's going to trigger the next bull run? We've looked at a lot of gaming at Republic, and here's my take on gaming. I come from like traditional gaming, playing traditional gaming, I meant. And if any of y'all ever played Cyberpunk, you guys probably know that it took roughly 8 to 10 years for them to develop this AAA game. And then upon launch, it actually didn't do as well as they thought it would do, right? And if you combine the number of gaming projects in crypto that are claiming to be AAA, that are probably 2 years old, that are building on blockchain using Unreal, like, it's going to take some time for those to mature and be in a place that'll kickstart a bull run, which means that we probably won't get a bull run triggered by gaming in about 3 to 5 years, in my opinion. I think like there was a bull run last year by the excitement of play to earn games with like, hey, we're going to reverse the order of value accrual from being accrued to the game developers to the players, which is like super dope. But I think that full vision isn't going to be fully realized until like down the line. So in the meantime, I do think things like the merge is going to trigger something like a bull run. And I think another place of innovation is really going to have to be in user experience and design for blockchain dApps, right? Currently, the major blocker isn't technology, actually. The technology is sick. But the thing that is currently a blocker is a user experience. So think of trying to create a MetaMask wallet. Think of trying to create even a Phantom wallet, or just using Kepler. You know, they're relatively technical. And you have to know what you're doing. You have to know what signing a transaction is. You have to know what your seed phrase is. You have to write down stuff. And that experience, that's just getting crypto. And then you go into like Uniswap. And you're like, okay, I have to LP? What does that mean? Why am I signing 3 transactions to LP? You know, so like all of these things that users have to do just to do the most basic stuff in crypto is highly technical and a huge barrier. So I think that needs to be solved. And I don't really think I see enough projects attacking that. But to me, to answer your question, what's going to trigger the next bull run is like whatever's going to facilitate the largest amount of new users in. And I think that's going to really have to happen through like improved user experience.
Yeah. And so I do want to kind of talk about the real world collateralization of assets, and bringing those NFTs into a virtual world, and how you may be assessing that inside of like the virtual space.
Yep.
Like, what does that look like, and what could potentially happen when we start collateralizing real world assets and bringing those into games, for example? What does that look like, and how are we viewing that from an investment lens?
Oh, that's a great question. So, yeah, I mean, so I don't think the technology really exists yet to actually collateralize NFTs to be, so you can actually get crypto and use that in a game. There are projects building that technology today, but they're not in a fully scalable, mature way, state. But I think there's a future where, say, you are like a whale in Kerbata, or you're a whale in any DeFi game, and you have a lot of these NFTs, like Axies or something like that, and you want to use that money, or you want to use the NFT, the value of those NFTs, to like get money that you can use in other parts of the game or other parts of the ecosystem. That will really, once that experience has been fully matured, it'll really help people play that game, because then they can actually use the value they create to collateralize and get crypto and use it in other places of DeFi. So that'll be really awesome. And I think that having that pathway will basically open up this whole door for play to earn being almost like a universal basic income type of play for people, because you see that happening with Axie today in the Philippines. You see that happening with Kerbata, around the world. Like, now that people have internet and they can play to earn games, the money that they earn is currently in the currency of that game, but once you can collateralize it through a lending product and get something like a USDC, then you get what's potentially UBI, and that's a really interesting thought path to go down.
Yeah, does anyone else have any thoughts about the collateralization of real-world assets inside of the gaming space?
Well, one thing that I guess is a little bit adjacent to that, and kind of speaking to collateralize, perhaps not real-world assets, but in-game assets and other NFTs. One of the pieces of infrastructure that is being built right now by Upshot and some other projects, but I think more efficient and effective NFT pricing. So right now, when you want to collateralize and borrow against NFTs, it's on a peer-to-peer basis on very bespoke terms, but also it's usually based on the floor value of that NFT, and floor values are really easy to manipulate. So because of that, the loan to value, or how much capital you can borrow against your NFT is really low. So with more efficient and kind of effective pricing oracles to value NFTs, that then makes these markets kind of operate much more smoothly. And that's something that I think we'll begin to see in a big way, come to market in the next few months.
Yeah, just to quickly chime in, I don't think we're really at the stage where we can have an extremely liquid collateral, at least on the NFT side, a collateral market. I do see a couple of different interesting teams building that out at the moment, but I think it's still still extremely experimental, and I guess the product market fit there hasn't really been tested yet. I think that the market there hasn't been truly validated from a customer standpoint, I think.
And so touching on NFTs while we're still kind of on this topic, what are some of like the greatest utilities? Obviously, we've seen gaming, we've seen it start with the artwork, music space. What are we seeing kind of like the next evolutions inside the NFT space, and then valuing those from an investment perspective? Hey there, little guy.
We have a new guest on the panel, guys. So with the NFTs, you've discussed gaming, we've discussed art, music, and then there's also, because what are NFTs? It's a contract, it's a technology, it's a piece of code, right? We haven't talked about how it can be used to convey and store information. I think one of the things we're seeing a lot of is digital identity and identity management, where we're all unique people here. We all have our own set of data that. There is no reason why that cannot be stored in an NFT, and this is not all of your personal data. This is just some subset of it, that you can use that to verify who you are for some specific purpose, like instead of your DAO votes being tied to how many governance tokens you have, there's Humanoid who's working on a one person, one vote mechanic. That can all be contained within an NFT, and that's what I'm really excited about, is all these other use cases.
Another one that I think similar to gaming is going to pull a lot of people into crypto where they don't even necessarily know that they're engaging with crypto, and this is where the user experience, to your point, is really important. But I think all loyalty programs will be represented by NFTs on-chain within, say, the next 5 to 10 years. Like, to use an example of airline loyalty points. Say you fly really often and you fly with one airline, and then that airline no longer supports the route that you're interested in, or you had a bad experience and don't want to use that airline, but you have really high status because you've traveled so much. That should be an NFT that you can sell, and you should be able to monetize that. Or maybe you don't want to necessarily go through the process of doing 10 trips to get that status. You can buy it from someone, but there's a lot of interesting examples where you can both make loyalty points a more efficient vector for actually earning income beyond just the walled garden or the silo of that specific company that can start to create these really interesting interactions. So excited to see that come to market.
Yeah, I think doubling down on what Lydia said on virtual identities, I think that's really some, like, profile pictures, PFP collections are really just, step one in that journey. I think, you're going to see, especially with, the rise of a Web3 native social media platform, which we really haven't seen yet. I think, using NFTs and exploring how they can be, how they can represent your identity in the future, I think is really, really interesting. And I think one project which I think is really doing pretty 0 to 1 stuff is Anatta. Anatta, I think the mint is dropping tomorrow or the day after, where they're using this holographic design to allow you to represent yourself in any Google Meet or any Zoom meeting as a anime character of your choice. And I think it's linked to the NFT in some form. But basically, virtual identities where you protect your real world identity, so you maintain anonymity to an extent, is very, very interesting to me.
Thanks. So I think I want to elaborate on Lydia's point in terms of like virtual identity. I think from an investment standpoint, I'm sure all you are familiar with like KYC, AML. That's something that I think can be stored on chain and linked to your virtual identity. And we would really love to see more of that being played out, because that'll just really expedite the process for on-chain investments, right? So if you have a fully KYC'd wallet that is like proved to be, accredited or non-accredited, but from a certain geography and like have certain attestation scores as to like how legit it is, then you'll be able to make investments. And I think being able to do on-chain investments through like an IDO or something like that, a launch pad, would be really awesome to see. And that accreditation or whatever verification of like your wallet status can be stored as an NFT that's tied to your wallet address. So I think that's like something that I think would be super fascinating for NFTs. And the other thing is actually on the more just like ticketing. So like think of attending the next Avalanche conference or attending like the next concert of your favorite DJ. If you're always attending these conferences or concerts and it's attached to your identity, then the NFT gets like upgraded based on how many times you go, or you get access or perks or access to the pre-sale based on all this stuff. And I think that's a really interesting use case that is really only facilitated through NFTs. So I'll just keep it short.
Definitely. Well, since this is an investing panel, we have a couple minutes here. I think folks want to hear some alpha. So if you feel comfortable enough, are there particular projects that you are very fond of? If so, why don't you tell us why?
I think if you have been in this room for a couple of panels, you would have seen the Ascenders demo. That was also, we're very excited about Ascenders. They're going to be, an open world Zelda Breath of the Wild type game. And that really is something that'll provide that immersive experience. You're going to have multiple paths to play, and there's going to be, they have innovative use cases for blockchain in their token. And I don't know what they've shown already, but I think that's something that everyone should keep an eye on.
All right, Ascender shout out.
I'll do two really quickly, one that I like and one that I want to see. Also, of course, not financial advice and all of those disclaimers, but just at a high level, as far as a large cap asset, long term, I believe we'll have a multi-chain world, but oligopolistic distribution and a power law dynamic, and I think Avalanche will be one of those. So among significant base layers, I think they'll be valued in the trillions of dollars. So I think it's still very, very early for Avalanche. But as far as something I'd like to see, I'm really bullish on-chain options. Options are typically twice the size of futures markets in traditional markets, and they're a fraction of perps in crypto. So anyone that's building really interesting things in options, shoot me a message. I'd love to chat about it.
I think this is, I'll give two as well. I think the first one is, as I think most of you know, Corbata has been sort of, one of the first GameFi bets I've made on Avalanche. And, after working with the team since inception, I think they're really a class on their own. So, with the amount of catalysts they have, I'll give you two quick ones. The battle game coming out in April, and the migration to the subnet coming out at the end of March. That would be my GameFi bet for Avalanche. And the second one would be, unironically, USDC. You always have to protect yourself in uncertain macro conditions.
So I put up CoinMarketCap, and I'm looking at the market caps of the companies right now. So, obviously, I would say Avalanche is a really great blockchain, and if you guys haven't done a deep dive into what Avalanche is really trying to accomplish, I highly recommend doing that, because subnets are pretty mind-blowing. Another thing to really think about, though, is that Avalanche is EVM compatible, which means that it's compatible with the Ethereum virtual machine, which means that eventually things are going to go to Ethereum at some point. So, not that all of them will, but just like, thinking about all the projects that are EVM compatible, plus all the layer 2s that are built on Ethereum, and just like that growing ecosystem, I still would say there's a pretty good bet that that ecosystem is still going to get stronger. The Avalanche market cap is currently sitting at 23 billion. Ethereum market cap is currently sitting at 361 billion. Do what you may with those numbers. But if you really think that Avalanche has the ability to maybe overtake or get bigger because of how interoperable and like really scalable that solution is, like you could do your own math there. And another thing to think about is just the Ethereum market cap itself is currently 361 bill. Bitcoin is currently sitting at 800 bill. So if you also believe in like how those discrepancies and where those numbers go, I really would encourage you guys to like look at those market cap numbers, do some comparative analysis, and see if you see these where you see these different protocols like ending up in the future, and investing based off of that.
And just to add to your point on looking at those numbers, I think one of the really cool parts about investing in crypto versus investing in equities, for example, is in equities you only see new data once every 3 months when they release earnings, but with every single block you get new data. So you can track the number of transactions, the daily active users, all of the core metrics for Avalanche, for Ethereum, for Bitcoin, and kind of watch it grow in real time. So you can make super informed decisions based on that.
I think that's going to do it for today's panel. I want to thank each and every one of you. Great time up here. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Avalanche Summit, for putting on such an awesome event.